Hey, this is Scott Kokenauer with another exclusive interview. Today we are joined by Sean Lord. I'm just going to bring him up and we're going to talk with him. Sean, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Scott. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Wonderful. It's a good day to be alive.
That's right.
So, tell us a little bit. Where do you live? What do you do? What makes you tick?
Okay.
Who is Sean?
Uh, I'm Sean. I currently live in Tulsa, Oklahoma with my wife, Haley, and our two kids, Daniel and Scarlett. And we're not from Tulsa. We kind of consider ourselves from all over, but this is where we call home right now. I am currently the life groups and life missions pastor for Life Church at one of our Tulsa locations. And I just love getting to do what I do. And what really makes me tick is people getting to experience God in their own world. Right. And when I get to see that somebody took a step and gave their life to Christ, or they got baptized and they just take different steps in their faith, and I see how God is working in their life, light bulbs going off, and the day-to-day change that God brings in their life, that really excites me. And what I thoroughly enjoy the most is when people start asking questions about the Bible. We just get to have deep conversations.
Now, as we were preparing here, you had mentioned something unusual that you got to experience. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I spent 8 years on active duty as a Marine, and one of my first places I was stationed was in Hawaii. And there was a big Toys for Tots event every year where a concert was put on. The Marines came out, we collected toys to give to kids. And we would always invite guests out to speak, to share at the concert, to perform. And the actor that used to play Gomer Pyle on the TV show Gomer Pyle, uh, he was there one year and he was singing a song for this Christmas concert. And I got to spend some time with him backstage. And I'd never met somebody that had been in a movie or a show before. I never met somebody that was famous before. My expectation had always been that it would always be about them, right? They expected people to know them, and they expected people to want to spend time with them. And in connecting with this gentleman backstage, he kind of flip-flopped that for me. There were probably 100 Marines there that night, and he spent an equal amount of time with every single one of us, just asking questions, getting to know us. And I got to ask him a couple of questions just about what's motivated him through life and what he's learned as he's met people. He shared with me that everything's rooted in love. And he kind of modeled that for me that day, and showing that even though everybody there knew who he was and wanted to get to know him, he put that aside and was getting to know us and asking us questions and was remembering Marines by their names. And it was a great example for me that, one, I can't come into conversations with stereotypes and expecting somebody to be anybody, but two, who I get to be when I meet new people and how I want to live.
Pretty cool experience. And in fact, when we were talking about the what's on your heart and what you want to share, that experience with that star who surprised you, that it wasn't about him, it was about other people. The thing that one of the things you wanted to get across was, if it's important to Jesus, it needs to be important to us.
That's right.
Tell me a little bit more about what you mean by that.
Yeah. Bible, when Jesus is challenged in the Bible of what is the most important commandment, they came at him with an expectation that he was going to talk about the law, but he fires back by saying the most important thing is to love God and to love people. And then he lets us know that everything else in the world, all the law, all of what the prophets have taught us, they all hang on that idea that love is the most important thing. And he was really trying to drive us to this idea that it doesn't matter where we live, what our current ministry or job is, if we are always leading through loving everybody that's around us and trying to point them towards God, we can never go wrong. And I think that has always been a driving force for me. And there's a small lesson I learned in that moment, meeting that gentleman and getting to hear his heart. And as I've learned about Jesus and studied what this idea of biblical love is, it's always towards caring for everybody around and leading them closer towards God. And if it's important for Jesus, like you say, it's got to be important for me, for everybody that I meet and everybody that I get the opportunity to lead and pour into.
Now, with Jesus, he made everybody happy, but but you and I will run into people who we disagree with, and it's not very easy. Do you have any idea, any advice on, like, if I don't get along with someone or someone attacks me, how do I love them like Jesus would?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's one that I think is, as any leader, whether you're in pastoral leadership or you're in secular leadership somewhere, you're going to run into that. And I think we've all heard the idea of tough love, right? You just keep loving them through it, and you're leading them somewhere they go. But Jesus modeled something beautiful for us in his interaction with Levi, right? And when we meet Levi in the Bible, he's a tax collector. He's somebody that nobody agrees with, nobody likes to see. And Levi was kind of standoffish to Jesus at first too. But Jesus did something that was unexpected. He put himself into Levi's world and got to understand who Levi spends time with and what makes Levi click, and where Levi enjoys spending his time. And even though he didn't agree with anything that Levi did in living his life and his career choice, he set aside his feelings and beliefs about the situation to get to know who Levi was. And as you continue reading and studying that story, realize that when Jesus approached him in the market and said, "Hey, Levi, I want you to follow me. And actually, your life's going to look different. We're going to give you a different name." Levi will look back and say, "Hey, this was never been about who Jesus is and who Jesus wants. It's always been about who Levi is and what makes Levi tick." And Jesus, when he got to know Levi and got to know what made him tick and what was important to him, he earned the relational equity to pour into his life, to a point when he said, "Hey, there's this thing going on over here, and I want you to be a part of it." Levi's only response was, "I know how much you love me. I know how much you care about me." My only response to that is, "Yes, I'm going to come with you."
You learn the relational equity. I like that.
Yes. And
Um,
you earn it by the way that we step into people's worlds and we get to know their families and what makes them tick, and not my will for somebody's life and what I think is best for them and the way that I love them, but learning how do they receive love? What is best for them in their world and their culture, what's going on with their family, and then finding ways that we can love them in their environment.
boy, there's so often we are just normally bent to tell people to tell people how we see the world, and this is like complete opposite, right?
Right.
So if it's important to Jesus, it's important to us.
That's right.
What's the other thing that you wanted to share? It has to do with the Bible. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I love the Bible, and sometimes I call myself a Bible nerd. I'm a theology major, and I just love reading about the Bible, reading the Bible. But I realize that's not everybody's ideal book to open and just read when they've got some time, right? But as a pastor, some of the questions I get the most is, why the Bible? Why do we put so much time and effort into this book that's so old? How are we supposed to understand it? I mean, I think anybody that spends time reading the Bible comes across something that might be confusing or is challenging, and just a lot of questions come out of it. And there's been so many conversations I've stepped into that people said, "Hey, I had to hang that book up because it was confusing, it was challenging, I just didn't understand it." But one of the most exciting things for me is as people start to seek to understand who God is through the Bible, and whether it's watching videos by other people or reading books or just spending time in God's word, God starts to reveal himself, right? I compare it to relationships. When I was meeting my wife, I wanted to spend as much time with her as I could, and time was important, but I also needed to learn things about her. What sort of things did she like receiving? What ways did she receive knowing that I cared about her? And time is important, but if I didn't know anything about her, I didn't know what would be important to her in those moments of spending time. And
Right.
with the Bible, and there's a lot of great resources out there, like the Bible Project, that they've already done the work to help answer some of those questions. And as we get to learn more about God and who he is, we realize that a lot of the things that God was showing to individuals like Paul or Matthew or Samson or any of these other leaders in the Bible, they're still true to us today. They're still experiences we walk through today. And there's a lot that we can learn. But more importantly, there's a lot that we can learn about God and how he's working in the world, because he's just as active today as he was 2,000 years ago or earlier. And we just have to take that step to seek to understand him and his word. And so much is opened up to us.
You know, it's interesting. I was listening to you talk about that. I'm thinking you've sparked this new interest in me. The Samson, the Luke, Levi, all these players in the Bible, they were made with emotions and attitudes, and they had bad days, good days. Some had hair, some didn't. For some reason, we tend to think of stories in the Bible as this whole set of other people with that we just don't identify with. So, seeking to understand the Bible, it means putting ourselves there and thinking of Levi like I think of Sean Lord. You know, wouldn't it be cool if Samson were to join us on this call? I mean, what would you ask Samson?
I wouldn't ask him anything inside of the story. Sometimes I would ask him, how did it feel to get up in the morning? Not knowing what the day was going to look like or knowing where God might be leading you in your calling in life. But sometimes that's so far off in the future that the day to day becomes difficult, right? When I think of individuals like Samson, Paul, they all got up in the morning, they got dressed, they cooked food, or they went seeking meals, and they had conversations around campfires, just like the rest of us do at times. And I'd love to get to know what was going through their minds sometimes in those moments of, man, I heard from God yesterday, but I'm not hearing from him today. But how did they keep going knowing that, and knowing that their story was so many other people's stories, but also very different than so many other people's stories, and how to wrestle with the day to day in that?
One of the most important or most interesting to me characters in the Bible is Saul, who turned Paul. All right. So if I had him on an interview, an exclusive interview with Paul, the apostle, I would say, okay, you're killing Christians. You're high up in the Roman echelons. If you were to stub your toe on a big rock, what would you say as Saul? And when you became Paul and changed everything, and you stubbed your toe on a rock, were you tempted to say the same thing? I mean, I would just kind of, maybe this is part of seeking to understand.
Yeah,
Think of it like approaching it like you're interviewing somebody, or just getting to know them backstage in Hawaii. That's interesting.
yeah. I love Paul and his life and his story, right? And I think his story is the story of so many that come to church and give their lives to Christ at some point. They had this life beforehand, and even though it may not have been opposed to everything that God is doing, it was just different. And then they come to this moment where they give their life to Christ, and I got hung up in that moment. Like, everything was supposed to be different from day one. It is different in many ways, but you're still maybe working the same job and living in the same life. And when you read Acts, it's almost like Paul had this conversion experience, and then instantly he was Paul, and he was somebody different, and he was on these ministry journeys. But really, when you unpack his life, it was probably 13 to 15 years before he started going on missionary journeys. And he went back and just continued making tents in his hometown. And I wonder what those 15 years look like. What were the conversations like with his friends that used to see him going to these rallies to kill Christians, right? And now he's talking about Jesus, and he's talking about this life change moment. And I would imagine people said, "You're nuts, man. Like, you're talking crazy," or "That didn't really happen." God was still working in his life, right? Those 15 years of not knowing what was coming, but knowing that something had happened, and still living in the world he lived in yesterday.
I can imagine being a Christian in a town nearby another town where there was a mass execution of Christians, and Paul comes. I know him as Saul. Paul comes, and he starts talking to me. I would be thinking, okay, is this a different tact to ultimately kill me? I'll be, and think about Ananias.
Yeah.
The guy that was responsible or called to go tell Saul that his life was changing. And I mean, I know what it's like to have this big event coming up, and I'm scared to death. So I kind of know what Ananias was feeling just a little bit from my perspective, right? So there were scared guys. There were courageous guys. There were guys who made mistakes, and same with the girls. I mean, man, there's so much we can identify with in the Bible.
Yeah, it's like everybody's story, no matter where you've come from or what God's doing in your life, somebody in the Bible has been there or has experienced something similar, and God still speaks to us in that. Whether we're talking about Saul, now Paul, and those years he spent really forming his relationship with Christ before God really said, "Hey, here's your true calling." Or it's Ananias or any other character in the Bible that through anxiety and faced the frustration and the fear of what's coming, and knowing that, man, I had this moment with God, but now I'm here, right? I think the burning bush, if God had come to me in this moment and said, "Here I am, right here," but then for the 40 years after that, I don't hear a specific voice from God anymore, that would be confusing. And it would have anxiety and be scary, but God still showed up 40 years later and said, "Hey, now we've arrived at this moment, and we're going to do something." Right. And that's our stories as well.
So seeking to understand the Bible is almost like putting ourselves literally in the Bible, go into it and have a look around.
That's right.
The humans were, they're human, we're human. They had the same emotions. If there was a dictionary, there'd be a list of emotions that humans went through back then, and it'd be the same emotions, right? There's still the same.
Right.
I'm going to put you on the spot here. What is your favorite character in the Bible?
Honestly, this is going to sound cliche, but it's probably Paul, mainly because of what he experienced, right? And the pressures, the frustrations, the anxieties, the moments of being somewhere of sheer misery and not knowing what God's going to do next, not knowing that God has called you somewhere. But I would imagine when Saul, now Paul, met Jesus and had this moment of life change, he expected that it was just going to be positive from that moment on. And that first time he landed himself in a prison, and prisons then are nothing like prisons today, right? You're in a dark dungeon with a muddy floor. You're shackled. You're kind of contorted, so it's painful. You don't know when you're going to eat. It's really uncomfortable to sleep. It's just miserable. And I can imagine being there in that moment, not knowing like, why did God put me here? What is he going to do next? How am I going to get out of this? And even though most of us as Christians, we don't find ourselves in shackles in a dungeon somewhere, there's so many moments in my life that I've said, God, how did I get here? I know you called me somewhere, but I just walked out of these difficult conversations. I feel like these people don't understand me. I'm scared for what's coming. My family's just facing all kinds of pain and anxiety right now, and I'd rather be anywhere else in life but right here. But then God shows up later and says, hey, I recognize what you've been going through, and all of that is because I want to take you here. And if Paul had not endured those moments in prison, we wouldn't have some of the greatest life teachings that we have today. And I reflect on the life of Paul, and he was a person that was kind of rejected by the church because of who he was. And that's maybe your story, because it's definitely my story. But then he stepped in and experienced Jesus in a way that God said, hey, I'm not going to remember you for who you were. I'm going to remember you for who I created you to be and where I'm taking you. And there was grace and mercy and kindness in that. There's so much that all of us can learn in experiencing that.
A rhetorical question. Does the pandemic change all that? We are living post 2020. All right. And so many of us have lost so much, and things have changed so dramatically and deeply that as you were talking, I was putting myself in that dirty dungeon and trying to keep my arms from falling asleep, and all that sort of stuff, from being chained to the wall, and not knowing. You and I have this, what I call proximity blindness tendency, where we read the story, we know the ending, we know what God did to shake the jail and set Paul free. He didn't. And so we've got that blindness. We have to put ourselves ahead of the end of the story and imagine what it would be like. And the best way to do that is imagine right now. We don't know what 2021 is going to bring. Right. So now we can begin to understand a little bit of what the jail is like, right?
That's right. And the other beauty about Paul is he never claimed to be perfect or have it all figured out. And he knew that he was just living a life where God was on his side and leading him places. And I think whether we're stuck at home right now because of the pandemic, or we're at work facing the fears of life and everything that's going on, we don't have to be perfect. We don't have to have all the answers. We don't have to know all the right moves to make. We just have to know that God is there. He loves you, and he's called you to love everybody around you.
Right, right. Well, Sean, it has been a joy to get to know you, and it's been a great interview. I enjoyed talking with you. I hope we can talk again soon.
Yeah, it's been great. Thanks for having me. It was a joy as well.
Well, this has been another exclusive interview, and the subject matter expert on today's episode is Sean Lord. Thank you for joining. Thank you for listening. Thanks, Sean. We'll talk to you later.
See you later.